15:15, on the afternoon of the 19th of July, 1989, a DC-10 is holding at 37,000 feet above Iowa, and the air up here is perfectly smooth. Below, the corn is at full summer height, laid out in the section green squares that farmland takes on from altitude. There is nothing to see from the windows but weather that has decided to behave. There are 296 people aboard. In the cabin, the last of the lunch service is being cleared, trays collected, cups gathered in. It is the quiet stretch of a short domestic flight, the part nobody remembers afterwards because nothing happens in it. Cabin crew work the aisles. Passengers read, or sleep, or watch the fields go past underneath them. In row 30-something, an off-duty United training captain named Denny Fitch is reading a magazine. He is not working today. He teaches other pilots how to fly this aircraft, and at this moment that is entirely irrelevant to him. He is a man in a seat with a magazine, going home. In the tail of the aircraft, mounted through the fin above the rear fuselage, sits the number 2 engine. Inside it, the first stage fan disc is spinning at full cruise speed, a solid ring of titanium doing exactly what it has done, without complaint, for 18 years. That titanium was made in 1971. When it was poured, something went wrong at a scale nobody could see. A small region of the metal formed with different properties from the material around it, a flaw set into the disc on the day the metal itself was born. It was there before the disc was machined. It was there before the engine was built, before the aircraft was assembled, before any of the people on board this afternoon bought a ticket. Every inspection the disc has undergone has passed it. Every flight it has flown has fatigued it a fraction further. The crack has been growing slowly, patiently, for the entire working life of the part, spreading out from a defect that no maintenance schedule was ever designed to find. The flight deck is calm. Behind them, 3 independent hydraulic systems are doing their work in silence, engineered so that no single failure could ever take all 3, the redundancy that makes an aircraft like this trustworthy. Nothing about this minute is unusual. That is what makes it worth watching. Hold on the fan disc, turning in the dark inside its casing, 60 seconds from now. It has survived 41,000 flights. It will not survive this one. In 1971, in a mill in America, a batch of titanium is melted, poured, and cooled. Somewhere in that ingot, nitrogen has contaminated the metal, leaving a hard, brittle patch that will never behave like the alloy around it. The flaw is microscopic, and it is permanent. The metal is forged into a fan disc. The disc is fitted to a General Electric CF6 engine, and the engine is bolted into the tail of a Douglas DC-10. Nobody knows the defect exists. Nobody at any stage of its life will be looking for something quite like it. That was the first seed, and it was sown before the aircraft ever flew. The second was drawn on a designer's board. The DC-10 was a creature of the economics of its age, a wide body built to move hundreds of people cheaply on routes that could not fill a 747. 3 engines, 2 on the wings, 1 buried in the tail. An aircraft that size cannot be flown by muscle, so everything that moves it, the elevators, the ailerons, the rudder, is driven by hydraulic pressure. The engineers understood the risk in that dependence and answered it the way the industry always had, with redundancy. 3 separate systems, 3 separate pumps, 3 separate reservoirs. Any one of them could fly the airplane. What redundancy could not solve was geometry. To reach the control surfaces at the back, the lines of all 3 systems had to pass through the tail, and they passed close together in the same small volume of structure behind the number 2 engine. There were no fuses to seal a rupture, no valves to isolate a leak. The certification logic held that losing all 3 at once was so improbable that it need not be designed against. The number that circulated afterwards was 1 billion to 1. The third seed was human, and it grew slowly. Fan discs are removed and inspected on a schedule, soaked in fluorescent dye. examined under ultraviolet light by a technician looking for the faint glow of a crack. This disc went through that process repeatedly over 17 years. Each time it was passed as serviceable. The NTSB would conclude that the defect was detectable, but the inspection system relied on tired eyes and unaided judgment, and that the procedures made insufficient allowance for the limits of the people performing them. None of this was negligence in the theatrical sense. It was a metallurgical accident, a structural compromise, and an inspection routine, each reasonable alone, quietly agreeing with one another for 18 years. A flaw cast in a metal does not, by itself, bring an aircraft down. Between the vacuum furnace of 1971 and the sky over Iowa lay 18 years, 6 visits to an engine shop, and a chain of people who each had one chance to end the story early. The disc was a Stage 1 fan disc for a General Electric CF6-6, and a pocket of contaminated titanium inside it, a hard alpha inclusion, was there from the moment the metal cooled. It survived the checks at manufacture. It survived machining. Then, in service, it began to do what such defects do. It seeded a fatigue crack, and the crack grew a fraction with every cycle of heat and load through 15,503 hours and 41,009 flights. 6 times the disc came off an aircraft and into United's overhaul facility at San Francisco for fluorescent penetrant inspection, a process in which the part is coated, washed, developed, and read under ultraviolet light by a human being. 5 times there was probably nothing large enough to see. The 6th time, in February 1988, the National Transportation Safety Board later concluded there was. By then the crack broke the surface for around half an inch. It was found by no one, and the engine went back on the wing for another 760 flights. That is why the board's probable cause, when it came, named neither the crew, nor the weather, nor the metal alone. It named inadequate consideration of human factors in the inspection and quality control procedures used at the overhaul facility, a system that asked people to catch what people, working at that pace, in that light, with that training, could not reliably catch. The second seed was in the airframe. The DC-10 carried 3 hydraulic systems for redundancy, but their lines ran close together through the tail, and there was nothing in the number 3 system to seal a leak. The industry had been shown before what a single point of failure in that airplane could do to its controls, and shown again in 1985 what the total loss of hydraulics meant. The certification arithmetic held that the combination was too improbable to design against. 1 billion to 1. Everything was in place. The metal, the missed indication, the geometry of the tail, the assumption written into the rules. And so it is 15:15 on July 19th, 1989, and none of it is visible. Trays are coming back down the aisle. The air over the corn is smooth. In row 30-something, Denny Fitch turns a page. In the tail, the disc turns at full speed, as it has 41,009 times before. It is 9 minutes past 2 in the afternoon, Central Daylight Time, when United Airlines Flight 232 lifts off from Denver-Stapleton, bound for Chicago and then Philadelphia. 285 passengers, 11 crew. The DC-10 climbs to 37,000 feet and settles in a cruise over Iowa. First Officer William Records is flying. Captain Alfred Haynes monitors. Second Officer Dudley Dvorak works the engineers panel. Lunch service is being cleared. In the cabin, an off-duty United training check airman named Denny Fitch is a passenger like any other. At 16 minutes past 3, in a shallow right turn under autopilot, there is a loud bang, and the airframe shutters. The instruments tell the first part of the story quickly. The number 2 engine, mounted in the tail, has failed. Haynes takes the controls. Dvorak begins the engine shutdown checklist, but the fuel lever will not close the engine down, and he has to reach for the firewall shutoff. This is a procedure the crew have practiced. It is survivable. It is not, by itself, an emergency that kills anyone. Within perhaps half a minute, the second part of the story arrives. Dvorak reports that the hydraulic pressure and quantity gauges are falling. Not one system, all three. The DC-10 carries three independent hydraulic systems precisely so that this cannot happen, and the needles go to zero anyway. Records tells Haynes he cannot control the airplane. The control column and the rudder pedals now move nothing at all. Every aerodynamic surface on the aircraft, elevators, ailerons, rudder, spoilers, flaps, slats, is dead. The aircraft banks steadily to the right, past 30 degrees, and keeps going. Haynes closes the throttles on the two remaining wing engines, and the wing comes back up. That accidental discovery is the entire remaining flight. Thrust on the left engine, thrust on the right engine, nothing else. The aircraft begins to porpoise, climbing and sinking in a slow cycle it will never fully lose, and it wants to turn right. Every circle from here will be a right-hand circle. At around 3:20, the crew declare an emergency to Minneapolis Center and ask for the nearest airport. They're given Sioux Gateway at Sioux City, roughly 60 miles away. At about 3:29, Senior Flight Attendant Jan Brown comes to the cockpit with a message. There is a DC-10 instructor pilot in the cabin, and he's offering to help. Haynes accepts. Fitch comes forward and finds three men flying a wide-body airliner with two throttle levers. At 3:16, an hour and 7 minutes out of Denver, the number 2 engine comes apart. The cabin hears one heavy report from the tail. On the flight deck, First Officer William Records is flying. Captain Alfred Haynes reaches for the throttles and finds the tail engine already gone, and Flight Engineer Dudley Dvorak begins the shutdown drill. Then Records tells the captain the airplane will not answer his controls. The gauges explain it. Pressure and quantity on all three hydraulic systems are falling towards zero. The DC-10 has no cables, no manual reversion. Fragments of the fan disc have cut every line where the three systems pass close together in the tail, and with the fluid goes every control surface on the aircraft. The crew has two engines under the wings and nothing else. The aircraft settles into a slow oscillation, rising and sinking through hundreds of feet and drifting always to the right. Working the throttles by hand, the pilots learn that more thrust raises the nose, less lowers it, and uneven thrust turns the wings. It is not flying. It is steering by tendency. A flight attendant brings word that a company DC-10 instructor is in the cabin. Dennis Fitch, a training check airman, comes forward and from that point kneels on the floor between the seats with a throttle in each hand while the pilots work the radios and the descent. The aircraft makes a series of wide right-hand circles down towards Iowa. Sioux Gateway is a small field with short runways and an Air National Guard unit on duty, and 2 years earlier it had rehearsed exactly this. A wide-body aircraft down, more casualties than the county has ambulances. That rehearsal is now being executed in earnest while the airplane is still in the air. At 1600 hours, 44 minutes after the engine failed, United 232 arrives over runway 22 at about 215 knots with a sink rate of some 1,600 feet a minute, roughly twice the proper speed and several times the proper descent. In the last seconds, the right wing drops. The wingtip touches first, the right main gear strikes, and the aircraft breaks up and cartwheels, shedding sections along the runway and into the corn beside it. Fuel from the right wing ignites. 111 people die at the airfield. A passenger dies of injuries 31 days afterwards, bringing the toll to 112. 184 alive, many of them walking out of the standing corn on their own. The aircraft comes to rest in pieces on runway 22 and in the corn beside it. The main fuselage section is inverted in a cornfield north of the runway, out of sight of the emergency vehicles waiting on the tarmac. For the first moments, there is no fire visible from the ground, only a column of smoke rising from a maze. Inside the inverted cabin, survivors hang upside down in their seats in darkness, Held by belts they must release while braced against the ceiling that is now the floor. There is fuel, and there is smoke, and the corn is high enough that people who reach the ground cannot see where the aircraft is or where safety lies. Some passengers walk out of the field unaided. Others are cut free by rescuers who follow the sound of voices through the crop. The response is fast because it has been rehearsed. Sioux Gateway is a small airport with a National Guard base attached, and 285 personnel of the Iowa Air National Guard happened to be on duty that afternoon. 2 years earlier, the airport had run a full-scale exercise built around a wide-body aircraft crash with a large number of casualties. The plans written for that drill are now executed against the real thing. Ambulances, buses, guardsmen, and off-duty hospital staff converge. Triage is established, and the injured are moved to Marion Health Center and St. Luke's Regional Medical Center in Sioux City. Of the 296 people on board, 111 die that day, and one more dies of injuries a month later. 184 survive. 13 of the survivors are uninjured. The pattern of survival is not neat. It does not follow the seat map in any way that offers comfort, and the 4 infants carried as lap children, unrestrained in adult arms, fare worst of all. One of them is found alive in an overhead compartment by a passenger who goes back into the smoke after hearing a baby crying. All 4 pilots survive. Captain Al Haynes, First Officer Bill Records, Flight Engineer Dudley Dvorak, and Denny Fitch are cut from the crushed cockpit section, which rescuers initially mistake for wreckage debris rather than a place where anyone could still be alive. It takes about 35 minutes to free them. By evening, the survivors are counted, the dead are being identified, and the airfield is quiet again. The investigation begins the same night. What we'll look for, above all, is the missing piece of a number 1 fan disc, and that piece is not on the airfield. It is somewhere out in the Iowa farmland, and it will stay there for 3 months. The easy explanation was there from the first hour. An engine had failed. Engines do fail, rarely and violently, which is precisely why a DC-10 carries 3 of them, and why it carries 3 entirely separate hydraulic systems to move its control surfaces. Lose one engine, and you land on the other 2. That was the design promise, and on paper it held. The number the industry quoted for losing all 3 hydraulic systems at once was around 1 billion to 1. So the first story wrote itself. Freak chance, an act of statistical cruelty, nobody's fault. The investigation dismantled that story piece by piece. The fracture began in the fan disc of the tail engine. In a region of contamination formed when the titanium was cast in 1971. Nitrogen had been trapped in the metal during melting, creating a hard, brittle inclusion, and around that flaw, fatigue crack had grown slowly across 18 years of service. It did not appear overnight. It was there, growing through inspection after inspection at overhaul, including the fluorescent penetrant checks designed to find exactly that kind of defect. The crack had reached a size that should have been visible. It was not found. That is what NTSB report AR 90/06 settled on as the probable cause. Not bad luck, but a failure to detect what was detectable and inadequate consideration of the human limits of people asked to spot faint indications on a curved metal surface, shift after shift. The second finding was architectural. When the disc burst, its fragments passed through the tail structure at the one point where all 3 hydraulic systems ran close together. 3 redundant systems, separately powered, separately plumbed, and all of them within reach of the same debris. The redundancy was real everywhere except in the place it mattered. 3 months later, in a cornfield in northwest Iowa, a farmer working her own harvest finds a heavy piece of curved metal in the rows. It is the missing half of the fan disc, sitting where it fell. Under laboratory examination, the fracture surface reads backwards like tree rings through years of flight cycles to the day the titanium was made. There was one further finding, and it is the one that reframes everything that came before. Afterwards, Other crews were placed in simulators and given the same aircraft, the same failure, the same problem of steering by thrust alone. They rarely reached a runway at all. What happened over Iowa that afternoon had not been trained because nobody believed it could be flown. The record is clear that it should not have been survivable, and that 184 people survived it. The disc comes back 3 months later. It is October, the harvest is running, and a farmer working her field near Alta, Iowa, finds a curved piece of metal in the rows. Investigators had searched for it for weeks. It matters because the fracture surface is a record, and metallurgists read it the way a coroner reads a wound. What they found was a flaw born with the metal itself, formed when the titanium was made 18 years earlier and locked inside the disc from its first day of service. From that seat, a crack had grown outward, a fraction at a time, across 41,000 flights, past inspection after inspection, until the last minute of its life. So the first changes were made in furnaces and inspection bays rather than cockpits. The NTSB's recommendations in Report AR 90/06 pushed the FAA and the engine industry to change how titanium for rotating parts was melted, examined, and documented, and how the people doing that examining were trained and checked. The principle was blunt. A part that cannot be allowed to fail must be looked at by a process capable of finding the thing that would make it fail. The second change addressed the billion-to-one. The DC-10's 3 hydraulic systems were independent by design, but in the tail their lines ran close enough together that a single spray of debris could open all 3 and let every drop drain away. The aircraft was modified so that a severed line could no longer empty a system, preserving enough fluid for the controls to keep working. Certification thinking shifted with it toward asking not only how likely a failure was, but what one piece of shrapnel could reach. The third change was about people. Investigators noted that the crew had no procedure because none existed, and that what they used instead was each other. Al Haynes, Bill Records, Dudley Dvorak, and Denny Fitch, who had left seat 30-something and volunteered. Crew resource management stopped being a course and became the accepted core of how a flight deck works. And in Sioux City, the value of rehearsal was no longer arguable. A drill run 2 years earlier, on paper, for an aircraft nobody expected, had put the right people in the right places on the day it stopped being paper. Afterwards, crews who flew the same failure in simulators almost never reached a runway at all. The disc lies in the corn, still and cold, its work finished. It survived 41,000 flights. 112 people did not survive its last one. June 1st, 2009. The middle of the South Atlantic for hours out of Rio.